Welcome to Sunday Soul Day, John.
Hey, I'm happy to be here, Damesha. Thanks very much for inviting me.
Absolutely. I'm so grateful that you said yes. I loved our first conversation and cannot wait for the audience to get to know you a little bit better and all the amazing things that you're doing. But first, I kind of wanted to take it back a little bit because you spent the early part of your life taking physical risk, mountain climbing, serving our country, like high stakes diplomacy, just so many things. What was a turning point for you that made you realize the greatest risk was a psychological one, choosing peace and meaning in service in your life?
Well, for one thing, Damesha, my life has hardly been a straight line, so there are lots of things that happened, and there were certainly some backslidings. But I suppose the first answer to your question as turning points was a battle in Vietnam.
Mhm.
I had gone to Vietnam as a volunteer, a civilian for the State Department, and I'd asked to be sent to the most difficult and dangerous place they had because at that point in my life, I was utterly hooked on adventure. The only thing that mattered to me was the next adrenaline rush. And as you sort of indicated, I mean, the first part of my life was climbing big, dangerous mountains and hitchhiking around the world and being in revolutions, and all of which I walked away from. So I became convinced that I was indestructible. I mean, more than the normal 17-year-old thinks that he or she is indestructible. I was convinced of it. So I told the State Department to send me to the one adventure I hadn't yet had, and that was a war. And they did that, and they sent me to a small city called Hue in the northern part of what was then South Vietnam, only 50 miles south of the demarcation line that's then separated North Vietnam from the South. And I was there late in the war when the American troops had left, so there was just a couple of us civilians still left there. It was a very dangerous spot to be in. Not only was there no protection from American troops, but the North Vietnamese had launched an offensive from the north, and at a certain point, in early 1971 had basically surrounded the city except for a narrow road going south, and there was a horrendous battle going on, and I was trapped in the city because they couldn't send a helicopter to send me out because the South Vietnamese army had broken and ran for the most part, and the situation was desperate. And if the army had sent a helicopter to try to rescue me, the South Vietnamese people that I worked with would be clamoring to get on the skids as well. And I'd have to shoot them off, and I couldn't do that. So I was basically trapped with the North Vietnamese army just 6 miles away and with no recourse. And it was a very difficult time. And I was in charge of the city, and since most of the people had fled, I was basically in charge of the city, setting up a martial law government because the officials had fled, and looters and deserters from the remnants of the South Vietnamese divisions had burned the marketplace and were terrorizing the city. Most of the citizens had fled. It was a real Kafka-esque situation. It was just horrible. Breaking glass, screaming, smoke, artillery thumping and booming, North Vietnamese troops just 6 miles away. It was a difficult situation. And I realized then that, or at least I thought I realized that there had to be some way to dampen, to stop the looting, because my part of my job was getting ammunition through the city streets up to the few South Vietnamese troop elements still fighting to defend it. But I couldn't do that because, like I say, the looters had burned the marketplace and jammed the roads. So I had to clear it, had to get rid of the looters and deserters. And I thought the way to do that was to set up a firing squad. And that's what happened. The South Vietnamese set up a firing squad. But the thing was, at a certain point, and this here comes the answer to your question, I realized in the middle of this horrendous situation, smoke, fire, booming, all in the middle of the battle. I didn't believe in the war. I knew the war was lost. I thought it was an unjust war. I was only there for the adrenaline rush. I didn't give a damn about anybody else or anything else. I just cared for the adventure. And here I was now setting up a firing squad, and yet I knew that the people that were going to be shot at that firing squad, the deserters, were probably all farm boys, dragooned off their paddies, maybe just the week or the month before, frightened out of their wits, so they were drunk and looting and all the rest of it. And here I was shooting them, and my home was 8,000 miles away. And like I say, I didn't give a damn except for my own self. It was a low point in my life. I realized how shallow my life had become. I just all of a sudden realized that here I was now in my late 20s, and I was turned on by only my own adrenaline rush, and now people were dying because of it. It was the lowest point of my life. I'm here because the next morning the skies cleared and fighter bombers from American jets in carriers over from carriers managed to destroy the North Vietnamese army attacking the city. So my life was saved, but it didn't mean that I hadn't undergone a real change, an understanding that I had to change my life. I couldn't allow my life to stay that shallow. I had to do something to turn my life around, and it happened during that battle.
Take a breath there. Wow. Like first, everything you described, it's like I could feel the energy. Like it's almost like you went back there. And so I thank you for your service. I'm so amazed that even in that moment, like you had clarity. And I think that's what everyone is searching for is that like clarity, that moment that shifts them. So talk to me a little bit about that. Like, do you think that was God? Do you think that was just, like you were looking around? Like what was it?
I think I was desperate. I mean, I lived my life up till then with one adrenaline rush after the other, one adventure after the other. And the fact that I kept walking away from them without a scratch made me only seek bigger and tougher adventures. So it was kind of the momentum of my own selfishness. The resolution, the change happened just because I couldn't sink any lower. I mean, there I was. My life was in great danger from North Vietnamese attackers. It looked like I couldn't get out. I was going to die there or be taken prisoner. I had to start, looking at what the hell I was going to do with my life. And it's at that point where I suddenly come to grips with who I was. And I didn't need God to tell me. I could see it for myself all of a sudden in the middle of this battle, how bad things had gotten. And not only that, but the people dying and the war itself was all I was responsible for parts of it. I was just there for myself. And so it was a recognition of my own selfishness. It was that simple. It wasn't the God or the devil or anything else. I couldn't sink any lower. I couldn't sink any lower, Damesha. I just couldn't sink any lower. I bottomed out during that battle and was lucky to come back with my life. And from that moment on, began to try to come up the other side of that deep, dark hole that I had dug for myself.
Thank you so much for sharing that. What did that look like for you, that transition? Because you also worked, on US initiatives in South Africa, South Asia, Cuba, like done all these great things. Like, what did that transition look like for you? And what lessons did you learn about leadership and courage during that time?
It wasn't a straight line up, but I came back from California. I came back from Vietnam. I went to California for a year. State Department sent me to Stanford as a reward for not getting shot, I guess. But mostly, I had a severe case of what now we would call PTSD. I mean, I'd walk on the shadow sides of the streets in Palo Alto, California, to avoid sniper fire. But more to the point, it was like trying to crawl out of that self-centered hole. And California at that time was full of what were then called encounter groups, where you sit down with a small number of people and sort of spill your guts and try to get a handle on your life. And it was really helpful to me because I had some time to reflect. And not only that, but I found myself in the company of some really caring people who saw past all of my John Wayne manifestations, all the BS that I was living my life. And they kept telling me, hey, there's a nice guy in there. If only you let him out. There's a nice guy in there. John Graham's a nice guy. And now you're trying to just tell us that all you are is this John Wayne character. Well, you're more than that. Well, it took me a long time to gradually begin to absorb that. And it started by me being a better father to my two kids and forming relationships with other people and being a better leader in what I was doing, still with the State Department. But it took a long time. It took a long time, and there was definitely backsliding, but what I began to learn about courage and leadership was that it all had to come from myself. And I couldn't get it by reading a book. And the first thing I had to do was determine who I was. I mean, that's the most basic thing. Who was I? And I began to slowly realize that I was an engine of good. I could be of service because I began to realize also that what was important to me had always been the meaning of my life. But if the meaning of my life was only adventure, then that was pretty damn shallow and it wasn't enough. And that's what happened in that battle in Vietnam. The meaning of my life wasn't adventure, and it wasn't money, and it wasn't power. It was something else. And I gradually began to find that meaning in some kind of service. And that's where I crawled out of that hole. And that's where I began to really exercise some real courage. It was one thing to be brave in the face of bullets whistling by my ear or mountain climbing falls, but it was quite another to be courageous when I was working, for example, at the United Nations, and there were difficult political situations where I even risked my job a number of times, or even being put in jail sometimes for some of the things that I did, trying to push for peace and justice issues when my own government didn't want me to go there. So I began to learn that courage was a lot more than physical courage. It was spiritual courage. It was emotional courage. They were all of a piece, and I had to develop all of them, all of them, if I was going to be a decent human being.
Oh my gosh, you said so much there. And I love that you started with yourself. Like that is the most important thing is to first surround yourself with people who see you. And I think you did that, in that group that you were talking about. They saw past who you were on the surface, and I think community is so important, to surround yourself with people who really see you, who can bring out the best in you and the parts that maybe are hidden from ourselves. So I love that you started with yourself, but then, you started living outside of yourself in service of others. And that is so beautiful to me because that's when purpose really starts, aligning for you. Like tell me a little bit about like that transition, after working for the US government, like you transitioned into global activism. Tell me a little bit about like what drove that shift and how did your time in Washington shape your approach to making real impact?
It was a long, slow process out of that hole, and I needed sort of like training wheels. The State Department ended up sending me to the United Nations, which was absolutely ideal for me. And they put me in charge of American policies toward Africa and the so-called third world, the poorer nations of Africa and Asia. And since America didn't really give much of a damn about the poor countries of the world, I had a lot of responsibility and a lot of autonomy in shaping American policies toward that part of the world. And by then, I had really begun to turn my life around, and what mattered to me were these peace and justice issues. Where could I use my skills? And I was smart and I was tough, and now I had a heart and I was going in the right direction. And where could I put all that? Well, the UN was perfect because I was able to do things at the UN on peace and justice issues that helped a whole lot of people out there. And one of the things I did that I will be forever proud of was that I helped end apartheid, the system of racial discrimination in South Africa. It turned out that apartheid existed because it was supported by military equipment, guns and the like. being shipped to the South African military and police. Even though there was a UN embargo, it was not honored because there was so much money to be made in shipping guns to South Africa, both from the United States and from nations in Europe. So everybody was a hypocrite, shipping guns to South Africa that propped up apartheid and allowed white South Africans to kill black South Africans. And I realized that that was the issue, and that if I could stop the flow of guns, I could make a real difference. And so I did. I began to do that. I began to meet secretly with African members of the Security Council at the United Nations, and I began giving them documents showing who was shipping the guns and what congressmen and senators in Washington were the worst hypocrites, saying the right things but winking at allowing gun runners in their districts to ship the guns. And what that did was increase enormous cries from Africa about the hypocrisy of the United States, cries that I myself had helped generate. In fact, at one point, and I never forgot this, my boss, the American Secretary of State, got a message, a telegram in those days, a wire from an African foreign minister complaining bitterly about American hypocrisy and not supporting the arms embargo and allowing apartheid to continue. And in the middle of that angry message were a couple of sentences that I myself had drafted a few weeks before, given them to my counterpart in New York, who sent them to his boss in Africa, and then they'd come rocketing back in this message to my boss, the Secretary of State. Anyway, at a certain point, I built enough pressure so that I could go to my masters in Washington and say, it's impossible. We're looking like utter hypocrites. We have to back this arms embargo. And I convinced them to do that. And the Europeans had no choice but to follow suit. And so a tough arms embargo was enacted by the United Nations in 1980. And that embargo in time helped end apartheid. So I was responsible for helping end apartheid, and I feel really good about that. So that was I did things like that at the United Nations that were my path up to what you were mentioning in the Giraffe Heroes Project. But at a certain point, I realized at the United Nations that I was then so full of my ideals and so wanting to do good in the world. I was moving way past where the American government was going to go. So I quit. And was wandering around trying to figure out what to do with my life, how to save the world, for example, if I was no longer had my job at the United Nations. Um, there came a climactic moment where I was forced to put up or shut up. It's a longer story, but I was in a terrible accident on a ship in the North Pacific. I was on lecturing on a cruise ship, and it burned and sank, and I almost lost my life in a lifeboat. But I had a real realization there, almost dying of hypothermia, that I had to really get serious about my ideals. I was finally rescued in the middle of of a typhoon from the lifeboat by a Coast Guard cutter. It was a near thing. I almost died of hypothermia, but in any case, I didn't. And I came back to New York, having made a promise that I would renew my commitment to making the world a better place, and I would no longer shirk I now regard as my responsibility to do that. And it happened at just that time that I had met a remarkable woman named Ann Medlock in New York. I'd known her before, but I'd been married then, so it was like, okay, we just knew each other. But she had started something called the Giraffe Heroes Project, and that's what I'd like to talk a bit about. The Giraffe Heroes Project was called Giraffe because what Ann was doing was finding people who were sticking their necks out, hence the metaphor. She was finding people, men, women, even kids who were sticking their necks out to help solve some difficult public problem, whether it's an urban violence problem or crimes against women or environmental or whatever. It didn't make any difference, just people sticking their necks out. And she would find these people and get their stories told. In the beginning, over vinyl records, some of your listeners may not even know what a vinyl record is, but it was on a turntable, it goes round and round, and the sound comes out on phonograph. She started that way and with fax press releases and stuff. And she did it from her apartment in New York City, and it was became remarkably successful. I mean, there was a story on her in the New York Times a few years after she started. So anyway, I came back and met Anne, and I fell madly in love with her. And at the same time, well, not quite at the same time, it took me a year or so to really realize the value of what she was doing. She was a storyteller. Now, people, cultures have for thousands of years use stories, whether around the campfire or whatever, use stories as a way of instilling heroism in their peoples by telling the stories of people already doing heroic things. And that's exactly what Anne was doing with the Giraffe Heroes Project, telling stories, inspiring other people to be heroic too. And she had started the Giraffe Heroes Project to do that. Yes, I was skeptical for a short time, but then I began to realize how powerful storytelling was. And so I joined her, and the fact that I fell madly in love with her, and we got married, and also helped move things along. But we've been doing it together now for 42, 43 years, and the object hasn't changed. We're now, of course, using social media and not fax machines, but we're finding people who are sticking their necks out, getting their stories told. And we've written 4 books now about citizenship and citizen activism and courage. And I do all kinds of podcasting and lecturing and stuff, all with the theme of courage and service, courage, service, and leadership, of how helping people lead uh, by uh, by showing others how to develop the courage and the smarts to move forward.
Your journey is just so remarkable because it's you kept reinventing yourself along the way. And I think that's a part of, something that I would love, people to really get about their lives is that you have the ability to reinvent, rewrite your story at any moment. And you kept doing that time and time again. And I love that you mentioned storytelling because I do think it's so important, and sharing people that are, sticking their necks out to your point and really living their life truly in service and, stepping into their purpose for others. Like, can you share a story from, I think, what do you guys, over like 1,500 plus heroes that you've, kind of shared? Is there one that stuck out to you, like in your 42 years of doing this?
Oh, there are many. There's many. The one that's in my mind right now. A woman named Missy Cummings was a robotics expert,
Okay.
and she was working for a university, and her research was on self-driving cars. She was a robotics expert, right? And she realized that robotic self-driving cars, and when she started, that it was mostly Elon Musk and Tesla were dangerous. The technology hadn't been improved enough. They were crashing and people were dying, and yet they kept moving them forward. And she started blowing the whistle about the danger of self-driving cars and insisting that there had to be safeguards put in place before they were ready for public consumption. But the makers of self-driving cars, including Musk, didn't think so, and they wanted to move forward. What do they call it? They wanted to move fast and break things, I think was the saying. So Musk got her fired. She got a government job with the transportation department and kept pushing for regulations on self-driving cars. Again, more pressure. She got fired from that, or she got told by the government not to mess with Elon Musk and Tesla. So she left that and found still another place. And it was all about not quitting because she understood perfectly well that her job, her number one job was the safety of people, not in selling cars. And Musk and the other entrepreneurs who were behind it, they should have known better because Missy Cummings was had been for 11 years a Navy fighter pilot, and she was no one to mess with. So she absolutely stared him down, and she's been a major factor in in enforcing retractions or reevaluations of self-driving cars, and a recognition that the technology isn't there yet, and that they're still too dangerous. And she's responsible for that. And she's got up. She's done that by going up the richest man, by going up against the richest man in the world, which makes her a giraffe hero.
Absolutely. Rich and very powerful. So that is incredible. I mean, I didn't even know about her story until you just said that. That's just amazing to me. So, and
Well,
I,
we'll put her story up. It's so new; it hasn't even been published yet, and but
wow.
you'll see it up on our website. Yeah, and there, like you say, 1,500 more stories like that, and they're men and they're women. They're working on all kinds of stuff. One of the factors that has been important to me, also operate our overseas subsidiaries. We have 7 of them, most of them in Africa. And in some places in Africa, mostly Sierra Leone and Uganda come to mind, the condition of women is just terrible. Women have few rights, and some of them are even brutally treated. You're probably aware of some of the awful things done to young women and girls in tribal societies in Africa. And we found probably now a dozen or more other African women who have stared down the tribal chiefs and the traditional societies to start ending these despicable, violent practices against women and teaching women about their rights under the new constitutions and going to national legislatures and getting laws passed protecting women and giving them rights to attend university or to run for tribal chiefdoms themselves. And in other words, making them full human citizens and breaking the back of the tribal autocracy that had governed women's lives in some of these tribal areas forever. And these women are really risking their lives because the tribal chiefs don't think much of someone messing around with their power. So they're constantly being hunted down and their lives are in danger. And some of the stories are just hair-raising about what some of these women go through to stop violence against women in these tribal societies.
Oh my goodness. I can't even imagine. And I'm aware of so much, just from reading and watching things. And I love that you are sharing stories around the globe. But one thing I'm so curious about is, you and your wife couldn't do this on your own, and really step into your purpose and to allow your purpose to, be a beam of light for others, right? By sharing their story. Like, how did you think about like building your team and, really like helping people elevate your purpose? Because, even though this is a little different than maybe building a business or product, right, from scratch, like I'm still so curious because you couldn't do this on your own, And so when people are building a product or, running a company like you're running, a very purpose-driven company, like how do you think about like having people elevate your purpose?
Well, for one thing, Ann and I very much are the heart and soul of the Giraffe Heroes Project, and we've had a staff, but it's not been great. I think at most we had a dozen people, and now less than that because are able to do so much on social media. We don't need a large physical staff, and it's our audience that's big. I mean, we tell these stories, and now, of course, with social media, we tell the stories. It automatically goes global not just on our website, but in Facebook, Instagram, whatever. We tell the stories and inspire people all over the world through the stories. Um, so we create role models. We create examples, and that's what our whole work is. And our firm belief that creating examples this way is the best way of getting people to amend their behavior, to take on courageous tasks, whether it's fighting tribal chiefs for women's rights in Africa or fighting Elon Musk for public safety in the United States. So. Um, and we're constantly talking. I mean, I'm talking kind of to you. I'm talking to before COVID, I was giving speeches all over the place. COVID pretty much shut down physical speaking. And Ann and I are constantly talking to people and spreading the word. But we don't need a large staff. That's the beauty of social media. And we have a lot of people that love us and volunteer, and we can get a lot of help. We don't need a lot of money, but we do raise money, fundraising letters and the like, to pay for the necessities of keeping the project going.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And one thing that you mentioned, and I thought was so just powerful, is you said nothing is more important than finding the meaning of your life. And I talk about this often. Tell us a little bit about how did you personally find yours, and what advice do you have for others who are still searching and seeking the purpose of their life?
Well, first of all, the first thing I advise people to do is to understand how important meaning is. That
Mm.
from time immemorial, it's been the most important search for any human being, is to find personal meaning for your life. You look in the mirror in the morning, and whoever looks back from that mirror, you want to know you're not just marking time. You're not just on the planet for no purpose. There's a reason why you're here. That's the basic recognition. Now, what that meaning is, that's a whole different question. I mean, for me, my initial meaning was adrenaline rush, was physical adventure. And for 10 years or so, that was what meaning of my life was all about. And then finally, I began to realize that it couldn't be that. Now I look around, I see a lot of people around, some of them my friends, who are looking desperately, I think sometimes, for finding meaning in money and power. And I'm politely suggesting that that probably isn't going to be a very long-term solution. Because my experience has been from my own life, and certainly from the 1,500 people honored as Giraffe Heroes, is that the meaning comes from some kind of service, and the service can be anything. You can be of service in the business world, for example, as a business person or an entrepreneur, building a good product and selling it at a fair price under fair labor conditions and sound environmental regulations, and as a good neighbor in the communities where you operate, et cetera, et cetera. You can be of service at anything as a professional person, as a non-professional person, as a kid. I mean, you're looking for things that make a difference in people's lives, and so that's what's important, is to spend the time. Part of that initial search might also be a cataloging of what assets you have. I mean, if you're smart and quick on your feet and stuff, that's one thing. If you're not, that's something else again. But there's always a place for you. Maybe you're a terrific artist. Well, that might give you a guide as to what might be meaningful for you. Or maybe you're really good with math and science. Well, that might be another suggestion for where you might find meaning, etc. And so you take stock of your own situations, knowing that whoever you are and whatever skills you have is kind of like why an eagle has claws. I mean, there's a reason for that, and there's a reason why you are who you are. So that can kind of give you some hints as to where you might find. But the core thing is, never stop looking for that meaning, and don't stop until you're satisfied that you found it.
I could not agree more. And I we share such a similar approach. I love asking this question because I believe people's purpose is in their journey, and you don't have to look so far outside of yourself. It's in you, and it's in the things like you said, the cataloging on the assets. I love that you talk about like really finding meaning, not just in money and power, but really in service. And I think anyone can be of service, like to me, the best leaders are of service, and anyone can be a leader. You don't need a title to be a leader, but I think the service component is so important because it's something beyond yourself. That's when you can find true fulfillment, is when you're like, even for me, like working in tech, I was of service, to my internal clients and my external clients. I was in charge of scaling organizations, early and growth stage startups, but I saw it from wearing a service-oriented hat, and so I service my internal clients and my external clients. And even though there was aspects of the job that were challenging, it always left me fulfilled in a lot of ways because I was, of service. And so I love that
Sure.
you say
Mhm.
that, like you can find it in anything, you don't have to be an entrepreneur. You can find it in any element of what you're doing. So I love that. But one thing that you mentioned and I thought was so profound is also just remaining deeply curious. And I love that, like it's so important to remain deeply curious of yourself and constantly, you know, peeling yourself back. I use the analogy of a pomegranate as opposed to an onion because I'm like, when I peel onions, they make me cry. But really, the pomegranate is so beautiful because it's like you're peeling yourself back to get to your sweet spot,
Mhm.
and what was of purpose in your 20s might look different in your 30s, 40s, etc. But to keep, rewriting your story. So I love that you mentioned that. Talk to me a little bit about like what practices or habits have helped you stay in alignment with that philosophy?
Well, it's interesting. Momentum, I think, is one thing. I'm now 82, and I've done a lot of stuff, and a lot of good things I've done, I want to keep doing because I know they work. Like, for example, I just started this new series of programs for young people on TikTok, and I'm now looking forward to you finding other new social media things. So momentum is one thing. The other is a constant referral, an endless referral on this whole question of meaning. Is what I'm doing meaningful to me, or is it on purpose, or is it off purpose? And that's really important because the meaning of my life is service, and so that's my yardstick against which I measure myself, and so I'm constantly looking at that. The third is relationships. I couldn't do what I do without my partner, Ann Medlock, both in the Giraffe Project and in just about everything else that we do. Keep having a dear friend or a partner who's constantly willing to hold a mirror up to you and to counsel you and to listen and work with you and be honest in a loving relationship, that's really important too. So relationships are important. And then finally, perseverance. Don't quit. As you point out, there are bad times. Not everything works. And some things you may fall flat, and certainly you're going to make mistakes. I make plenty of them. But after I pick myself up off the floor and wipe myself off, I say, well, what did I learn from that? Let's
Yes.
not do that again. Um, that's probably a long answer, but yeah, those kinds
No,
of
it's
things keep
perfect.
me going. And like I say, I'm 82, so I'm doing something right.
You are. First of all, I love your answer and that you started with on purpose and off purpose. But I think, like, even to get there, people need to understand where they want to go and what their
Mm,
purpose is, right? To be able to have that yardstick, to your point. And so once they have that, I think, including the relationships, whether it's your partner, if you're not in a relationship, but having, like, counsel around you, people that can tell you, when you're messing up and hold that mirror up and be really,
mm,
I say just be honest with you. Like I think like for me, I look for honesty counsel, and like my board of advisors are honest with me. Like and not from place of ego or jealousy or anything like that, but just from a place of love. And so,
mm,
it's so beautiful that you talk about that with your wife, and it's something that is my yardstick for relationships. I'm not married yet, but hope to be one day again, because I have been married and divorced. But it's one thing that I look for. Like I want someone who is true to themselves first, so then they can hold a mirror up of truth to me.
mm,
And so I
mm.
love that you say that. And then just perseverance and that grit is so important in anything that you do, and to just never give up. I tell people you can pause. I'm a coach, I coach women and men as well, but I'm like, it's okay to pause, but just don't quit, and it's okay to lay down, but just don't give up, So I love that you say that. But you had mentioned something about TikTok, and you actually started a channel that's called Badass Granddad. Did I get that right?
Yeah, badass granddad. Badass all one word and granddad with two D's in the middle. Just go on to TikTok and do in the search box, put in badass granddad. I've done I think 28 episodes so far. I'm aiming for 100. And they're great fun. They're each 3 minutes. I tell an adventure story for about half that time, and then I use the other half to draw some simple life lessons about courage or leadership or perseverance, whatever that's tied to the story, relates to the story. But I use that first minute and a half so that the young people that I'm dealing with don't automatically move on, because as we well know, the attention span of young people on social media is measured in microseconds. But my stories are so riveting that they'll hang in there for 60 seconds, 80 seconds, and then I can get them for the full 3 minutes. And it's been wonderful. I'm getting a huge response. It just started. I've got already gotten about 150,000 viewers, and I get lots of feedback. And to my amazement, it's all been very positive. I expected this is an audience of 25-year-olds. There's going to be a whole lot of snarky stuff about, hey, who's that old fart telling us that? No, not that at all. I'm getting a lot of comments, and they're uniformly positive. It's amazing. And some of them are just, like, keep it up, great. But the other half are honest questions and comments from young people about their lives, showing that I really have reached them. I mean, they'll say things like, "Oh, I really failed in finding the courage to do this," or "I got this terrific challenge. I can't figure this one out." So I do spend 4 or 5 hours a week answering what I might call my fan mail, with these honest questions and comments from young people. And, the conversations are rich and wonderful. And it makes me, selfishly, I love doing it because it makes, hopefully, I'm doing some good with my commentary, and answering the notes. But I think I'm also doing myself a lot of good because it brings so much meaning to my own life to know that maybe, just maybe, that 25-year-old's life and the decisions she's about to make have been influenced in a positive way by something I said or wrote. So I'm just loving it. And yeah, badass granted. It's great fun too, because like I say, I'm 82 talking to 22-year-olds. It is moving that through that gap makes me feel young.
I love it. I love how you bridge the generational gap, and just again, going back to your passion about storytelling, and you do it in a way to captivate your audience, but then you're also still of service, by doing so, and then spending time like answering your fan mail, as you call it, like I just love that. And you're inspiring me, as I'm listening to you to approach things a little bit different from a storytelling perspective, and I think there's so much power in our stories, which is why I have the podcast, and
Yeah.
I love sharing other people's stories, and I share parts of myself, but I think like there's so much power in doing that, in a way where you can also then give the lesson, which is what I love to do because I call myself a student and a teacher, and I'm a lifelong learner in doing that because I want to be able to help as many people as I can. But I love your approach, like what made you go to TikTok though? Like, I mean, at 82, it's rare that you see someone in at your age going to TikTok and reaching folks and really not being afraid. Like I love that you're willing to try things and reinvent yourself. What was that about?
I'm constantly trying to look for targets of opportunity, to use that phrase. I mean, I want to reach every person on the planet. I mean, that's my aim. All 4 billion of us. I'd love to reach everybody with messages of courage and service. But I'm not going to do that. But I'm constantly looking for ways to do that. And now these days, it's just about all social media. And I realize that most of my messaging has been for people who are not young, and not in their 20s. And yet, I do a lot of mentoring to young people. I love taking, for example, young men out on, or used to when I could still physically do it anyway, taking young men out on really tough mountain climbing trips, and where they would really be tested physically. And then around the campfire, they were ready to talk about serious issues in their lives after a day of risking their lives on some cliff. Um, so I've always had an interest in mentoring young people, and someone said, "Hey, wait a minute, you're not using the social media, any of the social media channels that your own grandchildren are using." Why don't you do something? And so I talked to people, of course, a lot of pe young people, including my own kids and grandkids, as to what would work. And it turned out that that TikTok is probably the best avenue, even though it looked like it might get shut down. It isn't, so I'm still using it. And I want to expand it to Instagram and some others, and maybe YouTube Shorts, and I'll keep looking at that.
Yeah.
But I'll keep looking for new avenues as well. So if you've got some new avenues, let me know. Podcasts, and that's something else again. I hadn't even thought about that, but then I realized that LinkedIn was a great way to talk to people who run podcasts. I think that's how I reached you, heard about your program, and so I'll just reach out and say, "Hey, this is what I do," and if it meshes with what you want to do on your podcast, count me in. And so I've done a lot of podcasting and interviews. Used to be pre-COVID, I was running around the planet, literally the planet, uh, flying off once or twice a month to give a speech in Kenya or Canada or someplace. Now I don't want to do that anymore. First of all, because I'm 82, I can't stand going into a crowded seat on an airplane. But I don't have to anymore. I'm reaching more people on programs like yours than I would ever reach in a hotel ballroom in Malawi. So I'm doing just fine without physically moving around. And so as I get older, technology is, if anything, enhancing my power to move my messages around. And again, thanks to allies like you who share my vision and who are smart and capable enough to operate interview shows or podcast shows that a lot of people watch. Hey, it's a marriage made in heaven.
Absolutely. I love that you call it targets of opportunity. And, social media is a double-edged sword because, in some ways it's, challenging and dark for some, but also there's so much light in it too, because I'm just amazed at the power of it and, the people that I've been able to reach and just from one simple post or one quote that I put up and the DMs that I get, or comments that I get about how it helped them, it's just amazing to me. And so I'm sure you're experiencing that same thing. And I love that you're going on so many podcasts. Like I was looking through, before we started talking when you reached out and I was like, he's been on a lot of podcasts. I'm like, I can't keep up. Like it's amazing. It's amazing that you have that
I
stamina.
mean, where else am I going to reach millions of people? I mean, come
Yeah.
on. This is podcasting, especially with the really competent podcasters like yourself. It's a natural thing for me to do.
No, I love it though. Like you talk about something that I thought was so powerful because you said, what can I do with, or excuse me, what can you do with your one wild and precious life? And that really stuck with me. And it's just such a powerful question that, I wish more people would ask themselves. How would you answer this question for yourself today?
The question of what will you do with your wild and precious life?
Mhm.
Well, that came from a poem by Mary Oliver, right? Summer something. Anyway, she's absolutely right, and it encompasses two things that have been important to me. Wild, I think there must be. It really helps if there's an adventure to your life. The things you're doing are interesting. Maybe not wild, but interesting. That have an edge to them, and it keeps you and others on your toes. And precious, well, that gets back to what's precious. What's precious is being doing things that are meaningful to you, that follow a sense of deep purpose in your soul. And so those two things, follow that deep purpose in your soul, that sense of meaning. And we've talked before, I think the major source of that comes from some kind of service of giving back. But the fact that it needs to be a little bit wild as well, because you don't want to bore yourself or other people. So take on challenges like the woman I mentioned, Missy Cummings. Take on challenges that
Mm.
are risky. Take on challenges that are a little bit wild, because in these days, especially with the severe problems we're now facing in this country and the world, you got to be a little bit wild. Because keeping your head in the sand, despite good intentions, is not going to do it.
My gosh, I just had this conversation with a guest, Craig Ballantyne, an incredible coach and author and so many other things, amazing dad, husband. And he talked about wild horses, and he's like, I'm a wild horse, and he takes a lot of risk in his life. And I think it's so important, when you're doing the work on yourself and you're digging deep, asking yourself those questions and, surrounding yourself with people that can help you clean off that inner mirror and be a mirror back to you. I think it puts you in position to take on more risk, because you're betting on yourself at that point. So I love that you mentioned the risk factor, because it is so important. I think, again, our lives are so precious, and but it's so important also to live them to the fullest, because whatever your belief system is, I call my creator God. uh I look at it like this, like, God created like all these things, the mountains, the ocean, animals, plants, all these things, but he also thought that the world needed one of you, and so it's so important to look at what can you do with your one wild and precious life. So I
Yeah, good point.
love that.
I'm glad you're doing what you're doing. I really honor your vision, Denisha. I mean, yeah, you're
Thank
absolutely
you.
right. And the fact that you have taken the time and energy to create a podcast to spread this word is really important. So yeah, yeah, and I'm glad to contribute.
No, I am so glad, and one thing I ask all my guests, and I'm so curious with you, because you are still going, and still just operating at that high level, the momentum that you talked about earlier. Like, how do you keep yourself fueled, mind, body, and soul? Like, how do you stay spiritually grounded and energized to just keep going and keep doing this?
Hmm. I get enough sleep for one thing.
I love
I think, especially at my age, that's really important. I don't have the energy I did when I was 25. That's one thing is take care of my body. I do take care of my body. I exercise regularly. I can't run marathons anymore, but I can at least walk 2 or 3 miles at a time. So keeping care of my body is important because that's the vehicle you've got. So good food and exercise and all that kind of stuff. I'm hardly telling you anything new. And the other next thing is partnerships. I mean, Ann and I, my wife and I, sustain each other, whether it's a breakfast conversation or something more serious than that, and constantly holding up, as you put it, a mirror to each other. So having that there available. And the third is the momentum of realizing that I do have a purpose on the planet. And what am I going to do? Just stop and go to an old folks home? Why should I do that? People talk about retiring. Why on earth? What do I retire from? For God's sake, I'm having the time of my life. I love what I'm doing. So you find stuff that you love what you're doing, and I suspect that if you find stuff that you love what you're doing, you're also going to find stuff that's meaningful to you. The two are in sync. And so you keep on going. And I don't know how much longer I have. Like I say, I'm 82, but I'm not going to quit. Why should I? Why should I quit? So that kind of momentum is important. Is important too, to do stuff that you love doing, that you're passionate about. Do it with a partner that you love and respect, and keep your body as a vehicle in good shape. I mean, those are three things that are important to me in terms of answering your question.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Your answer gave me so much energy. And, the sleep, I am learning just how important that is in my 40s. And because I have always operated on very little sleep in my 20s and 30s. And so it's something that I prioritize now. And I'm now up to about 6.5 hours, which is great. But I think the sleep is so important, as well as taking care of your body, mind, body, and soul. But I love that you keep mentioning partnerships, and I think it is so important, because you see how high divorce rates are. You see, people getting in partnerships, myself included, that didn't serve them and didn't, bring out the best in them. And so I love that you mentioned that, and you said something so beautiful, that we sustain each other. I'm going to remember that. I love that. So
It's true.
important.
It's true.
Talk to me about, but before I let you go after this amazing conversation, like, for our leaders, our young leaders, activists, dreamers, who really want to make an impact. Like, what's one messaging or one piece of advice that you've gotten over the years that has really helped keep you going?
Hmm. That's a good question. One piece of advice, gosh, it's so many, and a lot of it does come back. I know I sound like a broken record, but a lot of it does come back. It's like, make sure that you fill your life with meaning, that you do things that are meaningful, that you're passionate about. And a lot of other stuff falls from that. If you do stuff that you're meaningful about, you'll end up doing the right things, and you'll end up also with a lot more courage because if you're doing things that are meaningful, serious obstacles sort of become speed bumps, you know? If you're doing things that aren't meaningful, a job, for example, that you hate, and even a small obstacle is like, oh, Jesus, do I have to do that? Um, do things that are meaningful to you and that you're passionate about and have real purpose for you. The obstacles become speed bumps. You keep on going. You're excited about life. Um, and yeah, being excited about life is also important. So, don't settle for stuff that's boring. I think a life that's boring is ultimately inconsequential. You got to keep going and doing interesting stuff. Stick your neck out. Be wild.
Mhm. Love it. Thank you so much. That was amazing. That last piece of advice I'm going to keep with me. I'm going to write it on my computer right here along with my favorite quote. It was so beautiful.
So,
I'll share my favorite quote with you is by Irma Bumbeck. And she said,
uh,
when I stand before God at the end of my life, I would hope that I wouldn't have a single bit of talent left and could say, I use everything you gave me.
yeah,
Amazing.
absolutely.
Thank you
Karma's
so
good.
much, John. Thank you. This was beautiful conversation. Thank you so much for blessing Sunday Soul Day and our audience. Like, what a gift. Thank you so much.
Thank you for inviting me.
Yes, absolutely. And everyone, as always, have an amazing Sunday. And do us a favor, put your favorite part about this interview or piece of advice that John has left us or any gem that he's dropped today in the comments below.